listeners to the Brisbane podcast. I'm your host, Sana. And now, today, I want to start with a very simple thought. How many of our biggest wins in business or career didn't come from strategy on a whiteboard, but from those invisible moments of connection? A handshake that shifted everything, a conversation where trust sparked instantly. Listeners, science now shows these aren't accidents. They are patterns in the brain and the body we can learn to influence. Our guest has spent decades decoding this invisible language of influence and synchrony, bringing applied neuroscience out of the lab and into boardrooms, coaching sessions, and everyday life. So today we are asking, if influence isn't what you say, but how you think, what does that mean for the way we grow in business, career, and life? Listeners, let's dive in with my incredible guest, Joshua Bernstein. So, Joshua, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Thank you, Sana, and it's really an honor to be here with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Joshua, before we talk about the details and everything, um, how exactly you would explain that applied neuroscience is relevant in business, career, and life? I mean, what where exactly, how do we connect the dots in there?
Yeah, so when you hear the term applied neuroscience, it may seem quite complex at first, right? Whenever you start to think about the sciences. But what we really have been looking at and what the research has been focused on is not only understanding what happens in our brains, but how can we actually use these understandings in daily life? So when we talk about applied neuroscience, it's how do we take what we're learning in the lab, but make it really practical in our daily lives. And what makes it so interesting is what's being studied and learned is actually what our bodies and brains naturally do. So when I think of neuroscience and applied neuroscience, I really think of it more as biological technology that we're born with. And the research is simply maybe discovering and starting to understand how to explain some of these technologies that are innate to all of us.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And that really makes sense, Joshua. That really makes sense. Okay. So now, mm, let's start with the foundation. Now, I mentioned one word in the intro, just for listeners, synchrony. So you talk about that creating instant synchrony without even speaking. So I'm really curious to know, Joshua, like in how exactly that works in the brain.
Yes. Well, what's beautiful about synchrony is that we have all experienced it. So, have you ever met someone and just instantly clicked with them? Right? We've all had those experiences and we tried to describe them with words. We say being in sync or being on the same wavelength. Maybe people will talk about having chemistry or in a team
Okay.
environment having momentum,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Vibes matching, frequency matching. So,
Yeah. And so it's a very natural process to get in sync. But the challenge has been that it's been largely a random process, right? You don't know in advance when you're going to really click with that person, right?
Mhm.
And so, as I've dove into this topic, my really big question that I've been working on for years is how can we make this a conscious process, a skill set, so that instead of hoping that we might have this connection with a person or a group of people, what can we do to actually create that connection? Um, and in order to answer that question, I will take us a little bit into the science part of it, the scientific process, But then we'll
Mhm.
talk in much more practical steps. So, as researchers have looked at this topic in the laboratory, for a long time, they've had to use very large pieces of equipment in order to measure brain activity. These are expensive pieces as equipment. And as a result of that, almost all of the research was done in laboratory environments, but not out in the real world. So, what we learned in the lab is a couple of very important things about synchrony. Number one is when people tell stories to one another. There's some fascinating research out of Princeton University showing that the brain activity in the storyteller and the listener actually match up and connect up. So when we say sync or being in synchrony with someone, what we mean is that our activity is moving in unison at the same time. So if we measure it in the brain, that means our brainwave patterns are moving in unison with one another. Synchrony can also be measured in other ways. It can be measured in how we breathe at the same time with someone else. It could be in the blinking rate of our eyes. There are many different ways the body has that enable us to measure when synchrony is happening. So, the research, there are now more than 16,500 citations of research in PubMed about this process. But the real question is when we're out in the real world, right? How can we do this and how does it happen? And so, what I've learned over time is it relates to a couple of things. So, number one, since synchrony is something our bodies naturally do, creating
Mhm.
another person is more about getting out of your own way than it is about doing something extra. So it's almost as if, Sana, as you and I are talking right now, if we were measuring our brainwave activity, we would see at certain points it does sync up, and at certain points that synchrony goes away and then it comes back. Very natural process. But if we learn to relax our body and to kind of quiet the mind, our bodies are more likely to go ahead and get in sync more frequently and to do it, creating a stronger connection. So, in terms of how we create synchrony, I focus primarily on teaching people at first how to kind of relax their body and their brainwave activity so that we get out of the rush of this kind of daily life, this, state of ego and agitation that we spend so much
Mhm.
of our daily lives in. And to take us into just a very high level in terms of the brain science, our brains operate at different patterns of activity, what we call brain waves. And the four primary brain waves are what we call beta, which is our waking state when we're interacting with people. As the
Yeah.
brain waves slow down, we get into alpha. As they get slower, we get into theta. And when we fall asleep, we get into delta. And so
Mm.
to create synchrony with another person, you really have to learn to drop out of beta and move down into alpha and theta. Because as the way to think of it is as your brainwaves slow down, you're no longer, for lack of a better description, trapped in your own brain and body. It lets you expand outside of yourself, what you perceive to be yourself, and connect up with another person. So the high level for the process is to do that, to relax the body so the brain waves can quiet down and naturally connect up with another person. So let me just stop there and see if you have any particular questions about them. We can certainly dive deeper into applications, how people use this, whatever might be most interesting to you and to your audience.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. No, I'm. So, Joshua, if this is natural, um, how exactly, it can be like, controlled? I mean, it's kind of, when, as you mentioned in the beginning, like, I would also think that this is something that is counterintuitive. That if this is natural, I cannot, um or a team cannot automatically match up with everyone, or can have a a single thought or single conversation in synchrony. So this is something natural and cannot be like manipulated or controlled or induced. So I think that's where it becomes exciting to know how it can be done. So yeah, actually that's exactly what I was thinking, when you were mentioning about it.
Yes, and what you mentioned is spot on, and that is it really is about letting it happen, like removing the barriers to it happening more than it is about doing something extra to make it happen. So we talked a little bit a few moments ago, this idea of relaxing your brain and body
Mm.
so that
Mhm.
a brainwave activity can slow down, that is the majority of the start to getting out of your own way, right? It's like peeling back layers of the onion so that you and I can connect in the way that our brains and bodies actually really want to connect. So, in a strange way, when we think of ourselves in daily life or in the business world, we're often getting in the way of having these amazing connections and amazing conversations. And I'll give you an example that happens all day, every way around the world. And that is very often people will go into a business meeting with an agenda, right? They want to get something from the other person during that meeting. And we all had that experience whereby a person comes in to meet with us and we can feel and sense that they want to get something from us, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that is not a good feeling, right? It feels very transactional. We tend to
Yeah.
guard up when we sense that. And that's the way the majority of people enter into their daily conversations in business and in personal life. So, what if instead of going into a meeting with an agenda and focusing in that, what if we go into the meeting with the purpose of getting in sync? Simply to create the connection with the other person without needing to get something from them. What I would say is here's what happens in that scenario. If you go into a meeting and you're not pushing for an outcome or an agenda, and let me be clear, I'm not saying that you don't have a certain outcome that you want. We all go into meetings wanting to, accomplish something or move in a certain direction. But if you set that aside when you enter the meeting, and you simply focus on creating that powerful and deep connection with this other person, when your brains and bodies link up, what happens is the separation between you and that other person starts to disappear. So the both of you start to feel more as if you're operating together, almost like you're creating a hive mind together. And since we don't tend to reject ourselves and what we want, you can imagine if you've created this connection with another person and you are now together creating an environment or an outcome that's beneficial to both of you, there's very little resistance there. So, this idea of influence by getting in sync is the simplest, fastest, most powerful way to influence and ultimately get what you want, right? And it's kind of counterintuitive because what I'm saying here is start the conversation without the agenda, right? Focus on the connection. And then inside of that connection, you will naturally flow towards the outcome that's beneficial to you and the other person that you're speaking with.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, we have seen examples of that, you know, I mean, specifically with some great communicators or, um, sometimes, in stand-ups and events, there are some great communicators who will, like build up instant connection with the audience. So I think we have seen this, but it's really, I think, kind of has been a missed opportunity for anyone who wouldn't know about this, that we have this innate capability.
Yeah, exactly what you said, Sunray. We all have seen people who are just really good at connecting with an audience, as you just mentioned. Right? And the desire that we all have is, how can I be like that, right? How can I connect like that? And and as many of your listeners has probably done, I have studied so many different kinds of influence and persuasion and personal development and what do you say? How do you say it? So there's this whole body of information that we're thousands and thousands of books and resources, and they can be wonderful. But what I personally found in my journey was that they were missing two important things. Number one, they largely ignored the invisible emotional component to conversation and to connection, which was a big gap. But maybe more importantly, to do those tactics made many people become inauthentic, right? People felt they had to behave in a certain way. And so much of the challenge that we have in business and in personal life is that by the time we're adults, we've
Mhm.
gotten to where we are, oftentimes with a mask or a persona.
Yeah.
That's not really who we are, right?
Mm.
And as adults, I think many of us at some point wake up and say, I'd really like to operate in the world as authentically as I know I am inside. But there's this fear that if I start to express myself authentically, what happens to all of the success that I've developed with this persona, with who people think I am?
Oh.
And so this pursuit of sync is a way to get back to your authentic self and connect with people using the biological technology that's already with us. And now you'll actually will be able to achieve more externally by being more authentic. So it allows you to kind of, as we say, have your cake and eat it too, meaning you can actually through the world really as you are, expressing who you are and creating deeper connection that leads to the business or personal outcomes that you're looking for.
Mm. Yeah. That makes so much sense, Joshua. That makes so much sense. Um. Oh my goodness. Yeah. The realization dawning upon that is really really, amazing. I'm very sure our listeners would also have this very surprising realization. So let's talk about applications as well. Specifically, like many people, like we focus on skills, building our resumes, LinkedIn profiles, and nowadays, video profiles for career growth. So, how can applied neuroscience give someone an edge in interviews or leadership roles?
That's a great question. So I would say there are a couple of ways to use applied neuroscience, and there are three, I would say, areas of focus that I tend to focus on. There is how do you use your body? How do you use your words? And how do you use your brain? And these are all in the context of synchrony. So we've been talking, for most of this show so far about using your brain to create this connection with another person. Well, in the context of the business world or in interviewing or things like that, that's always the place to start. So if you go into an interview, let's take that example. The
Mhm.
first thing you want to do, even before you walk in the door, is create that energetic, called synchrony connection with the other person. And number two, when you're in the room having the conversation,
Mhm.
I've developed what I call the shift code, which is about how do you use your words to create synchrony. I'll tell you very quickly how that works. I think your audience will find it fascinating. So
Yeah.
when you speak, you will choose words related to what you see, hear, feel, or think. For example, a person who focuses on what they see will use words like, that's a bright idea, or it's crystal clear to me. I see what you mean. And a person who prefers what they hear will say, it's clicking for me, or that sounds right. So everyone speaks in their preferred preference here. So if you can learn to identify very simply what is the preferred preference of, let's say, the interviewer, and you can do that simply by doing a few things. In the meeting, you can listen for the words they use. You can also look at the maybe emails or text messages you've sent back and forth, or maybe you find a transcript of an interview that person has done. You can very quickly find out what is the preferred preference of that person. I've also built a software that does this, like a copy paste text software to help people. So once you know their preference, when you're in that interview, if you start to use a few words that are in the preference of the interviewer, that helps aid in the synchrony between you. They will trust you more. So if that person uses words related to what they see, you start to share a few words about things related to what you see. So that's another element to it. And then the third element, maybe the most common one to date, is using your body. And when I say your body, there's a couple of things. One could be simply what's commonly known as matching and mirroring, right? So changing your posture in your sitting, changing how you move to match and mirror the person's posture and movements. One very simple technique, probably the fastest way to do it, is called the head tilt. So when people talk or listen, their head tends to tilt a little way, and I'll show you. I'll maybe head that way a little bit. If you tilt your head to match the position of the other person, that creates synchrony very quickly. You can also pay attention to the breathing of the person and start to breathe in unison with that other person. So, all of these skills about applied neuroscience are all about making you and the other person as similar as possible in terms of your body, your words, and your brain activity. So those are extremely powerful ways to act inside of that interview because again, the interviewer is looking, of course, at your resume and there's a job description, but about 80% of their decision is, do I have a connection with this person and would I feel good kind of working with this person or having them in the company? So I always tell people in this interview scenario, again, focus on sync. Start in sync. And then inside of that connection, share, the highlights of how you could best assist the company.
Oh my goodness. That is like, that magic ingredient or that secret sauce that makes that, dish at restaurants so, welcoming, wanting. We often think that, we need to unlock this special capability of succeeding through interviews. We need to know everything. We need to know all the answers to all the questions that interviewer is going to ask. However, I think this is such a minute, just a minute, you know, observations or such, um, you know, simple skills, but but I've never actually heard about it anywhere, Joshua. This is for the first time I'm actually hearing about this. So yeah, I think that our listeners are also going through the same surprise.
And son, I love that. First of all, you hit on something so great. You mentioned the secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
And that's I share that same thing. And this really is it's kind of the secret sauce of human communication. And we've all been raised in an environments, especially educational environments, that value logic and reason, right? Like our entire educational system has been set up to reward what we would call left brain thinking, right? You know, come up with a logical reason for this. It's rational. And, in our societies globally now, the highest praise is to say that someone is rational, intelligent, logical. Well, what if the real importance of connection and business and relationships were really focused on more of what we would consider right brain, right? The emotional connection, the creativity. I think we're starting to move back in that direction where more and more people are hearing about these ideas, having personal experiences with them, and also, having that feeling inside of them that, this logical path might have led to certain elements of success, but can be deeply unfulfilling.
Mm.
And my hope is that by sharing this set of biological technologies, people can start to kind of fill in that part of their lives that may be much more important than the logical endeavors.
Of course, of course. And I don't know whether this will um, be right or the correct way to say, but I really find that this really, um, these, you know, shouldn't say tactics, but you know, these skills, they call for, something that we call as mindfulness, that to stay in present and analyze the room, the situation, the person with whom you are going to interact maybe for the next 30 minutes or 1 hour. It's going to decide your next career move or the next business deal, or maybe in personal settings as well. So I think this really calls for that staying in present uh, uh, way or approach.
I 100% son. And I'll share a little thought experiment that you might find interesting. So there only is the present moment. Nothing else exists. And here's what I mean by that. As you and I are speaking here today, right, we are fully engaged with our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, and what we smell. And as you focus in on those sensory experiences, you are 100% in the present moment. Now, we talk about the past or the future, but they do not exist. Here's what I mean by that. As you think about something from your past right now and you envision it or remember it, you're experiencing that from the present moment, right?
Mhm.
And when you talk about the future, you're imagining that from the present moment, right? Now, when you get to that future that you imagine now, will it be the future or will it be the present?
It's going to be the present.
Exactly. So there only is this present moment. So when you talk about mindfulness or being present, that's really the only choice we have if we want to have very deep and powerful connections with people. Because if you're 100% focused on the person that you're engaged with right now, they will feel that, you will feel that, and it will be a much better interaction for everyone. It's actually the only choice we have, but we often start to go into our minds imagining past or present and future scenarios that take us out of this kind of wonderful connection that we're experiencing. So, as people go through their daily lives, be it in work, be it in relationships, I would just really encourage people to continually bring themselves back to the present moment because that's the only place that you're really going to have these very deep connections.
Hmm. That's very, very well put, Joshua. And before we conclude, actually, I do not want to, but yeah, with the time constraint, a little, sometimes, and this we sometimes observe during interviews or conversations that the person with whom we are talking or we are trying to establish a connection, they may not be, maybe through their body language, or sometimes we have seen. the interviewer, he or she is looking into her phone or checking something else, not having that eye contact, or it looks like they are maybe deliberately, or they are naturally not in full focus during that conversation discussion, and that may sometimes distract or maybe discourage us. So how do we tackle those kind of situations, Joshua?
Yeah, so there are, I think, 2 ways to think about it. One is when we're in person, and the other is when we're on Zoom or video conference. The biggest challenge we have is so much of our business life is conducted virtually nowadays. And it's very easy for people to get distracted or to be on a Zoom call with 3 or 4 people. And, unbeknownst to you, that person's really just reading emails or doing something else that they find more important to them. Um,
Yeah.
in I find it, even though people might be hesitant at first to do it, and especially in person, it's easier. But if someone is distracted when I'm in a one-on-one meeting with them, if they're taking phone calls or checking emails, like they might say, like, "Okay, yeah, go ahead, keep talking. I'm paying attention," and they're doing something else. I will stop, and I would say, though, this conversation is very important for us. So take care of what you need to take care of, but let's make sure we really focus back in here. To the point, I've even suggested and have rescheduled meetings from an in-person meeting if the person can't carve out the time to chat right now. Because as you know, this idea of multitasking doesn't work. And you can't really create a strong, deep connection and understanding with another person if they're focused on doing other things. So it's, I understand when people are in an environment, if there's a power dynamic, they might not feel comfortable at first with that. But again, if the person is treating you like that in this first meeting, they're probably going to be acting that way if you engage with them over time as well. So it's best to, I would say, take the risk up front of really trying to have an authentic connection without distraction. Otherwise, you might find that maybe you get the job, but the dynamic isn't what you really were looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you on this, Joshua. Couldn't agree. Superb, superb. So, Joshua, if our listeners they would like to begin exploring this, and they would like to um, start with some of the applications in there, and they would also like to connect with you, what would be the easiest way?
Sure. So the easiest way, and we can put in the show notes, is just to send me an email. It's Joshua at thesyncadvantage.com. On X/Twitter, I'm at Joshua Bernstein. And also feel free to connect up with me on LinkedIn as well. So those are the three places. Again, if they want to dive in and really learn more about this work, just send me an email. We'll find some time to chat. Would love to meet anyone in your audience that has interest in these topics.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to have all the links, the details in the show notes for our listeners. Easy reference and wow. As we wrap up, listeners, I am struck by something Joshua said. Influence begins before words. That invisible connection is both a responsibility and an opportunity. So, whether you are leading a team, building a business, or just trying to grow as a human being, applied neuroscience offers a new lens, one where synchrony, presence, and trust are just as vital as skills and strategy. So, Joshua, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this into the limelight. I mean, this is phenomenal. And I believe this is not specific. This is not something that we have to pay millions and millions to imbibe or cultivate. This is, we all have this capability, and we just need guidance and a bit of awareness to cultivate this. So thank you so much for bringing this into limelight.
Thank you, son. I really enjoyed this conversation. I love the way you summed things up and what we talked about. So thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of This Blend. So the next time you walk into a room, don't just ask what you'll say, ask how you will think. That might be the difference that changes everything. Until next time, keep blending business with the human side of growth. Thank you.